The congressional hearing room fell into dead silence as Denzel Washington slowly leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp, then reached into his leather portfolio and slid out a thick manila folder. Pam Bondi, sitting at the witness table, suddenly went pale. Just seconds earlier, her hands had been cutting the air with confidence, her voice steady, her posture unshaken. Now those same hands gripped the edge of the table like a lifeline. Denzel's gaze locked onto hers, calm yet piercing, the kind of look that could strip a person down to their core. He raised the folder ever so slightly, his voice steady, but carrying the kind of weight that made the entire room lean forward. "Before we go any further," Denzel said, his tone low, deliberate, cutting through the silence like a blade, "I think everybody here needs to see what's in this document." The camera crew zoomed in. The gallery held its breath. Pam Bondi, the same woman who had spent years fearlessly prosecuting criminals as Florida's Attorney General, looked like she wanted to vanish into the woodwork. What happened next would send shockwaves through Washington and leave millions of Americans questioning everything they thought they knew about one of Donald Trump's most loyal defenders. And before we dive into this confrontation, one that has the whole country talking, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when Denzel Washington steps into the fire against one of the most powerful conservative voices in the country. And the ending of this? It will leave you speechless. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because this showdown is about to get intense. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was standing room only that Tuesday morning. Every major news outlet had their best correspondents on the ground. C-SPAN cameras were rolling. Social media was already crackling with anticipation. This wasn't just politics. This was theater, and everyone knew it. Pam Bondi sat at the witness table radiating the poise of a seasoned prosecutor. At 59, she carried herself like a veteran who had spent decades in courtrooms. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her navy blue suit flawless. She had served as Florida's Attorney General from 2011 to 2019, building a reputation as a fierce defender of conservative policies. More recently, she had become one of Donald Trump's most loyal allies, even serving on his legal team during his first impeachment trial. She had come into this hearing fully prepared for battle. She expected tough questions, expected Democrats to throw punches about her past controversies and her loyalty to Trump. She had talking points ready, polished responses, years of courtroom instincts in her back pocket. She was ready for all of that. What she wasn't ready for was Denzel Washington. Denzel wasn't a politician in the traditional sense. He didn't play by the usual Washington rules. At 70 years old, he carried with him a lifetime of presence, a mix of gravitas and quiet fire that made people sit up straight when he spoke. He had the cadence of a preacher, the precision of a trial lawyer, and the confidence of a man who had spent decades navigating the spotlight without ever losing his authenticity. Washington had only recently stepped into the political arena, but in just a short time, he had proven himself to be someone you did not want to underestimate. He did his homework. He came prepared. And unlike others who seemed more concerned with creating sound bites, Denzel was about cutting through to the truth. For weeks, he and his team had been digging. Records, phone calls, trails of paper. No one thought anyone would bother to follow. And they found something. Something big. Something Pam Bondi clearly never wanted the world to see. As the hearing began, it all felt routine at first. Senator Dick Durbin, the chairman, gavelled the session to order. He spoke about the importance of the position Bondi was being considered for, about integrity and transparency in America's legal system. Senator Lindsey Graham, the ranking Republican, praised Bondi's career, hailing her as one of the sharpest legal minds in the country. Then Bondi delivered her opening statement. She spoke with poise about her commitment to justice, her years as Attorney General, her belief in the Constitution. She smiled at the right moments, projected total confidence, looked unshakable. The early rounds of questioning went exactly as she expected. Republican senators lobbed her softballs, letting her shine. She leaned on her resume, smiled for the cameras, and looked as if she had the entire room under control. But what she didn't see coming was the storm Denzel Washington was about to unleash. ChatGPT said Democratic senators pressed Pam Bondi hard on her Trump ties, her controversial Florida decisions, her handling of cases that had drawn sharp criticism. But Bondi was unfazed. She parried smoothly, dodging when necessary, delivering detailed answers when they worked in her favor, never breaking composure. Senator Amy Klobuchar drilled her on the infamous decision not to pursue a case against Trump University after Bondi's office received a campaign donation. Bondi didn't flinch. She had that answer holstered and ready. She repeated the familiar line. The donation and the decision were unrelated, the timing coincidental. Florida was already part of a multi-state action. Senator Ted Cruz followed with praise, commending her toughness on crime, before tossing her a softball about prosecutorial discretion. Bondi responded with polish, weaving together a thoughtful reflection on balancing justice with mercy. It was going exactly to plan. Bondi was sailing through. Her allies in the gallery smiled knowingly. Her critics looked increasingly frustrated. The hearing was falling into her rhythm until the microphone slid to Denzel Washington. "Miss Bondi," Denzel began, voice calm but carrying a gravity that instantly shifted the air in the room. "Thank you for being here today. I want to start by acknowledging your long career in public service. You've made decisions that shaped lives, that influenced millions, and that deserves recognition." Bondi smiled faintly, expecting another routine opening, maybe even a compliment before another harmless line of questioning. Denzel leaned forward. "In your opening statement, you spoke about integrity, about truth. You said, and I quote, 'The foundation of justice is truth. Without truth, the system crumbles.' Do you still believe that?" "Yes," Bondi answered firmly, her confidence returning. "I believe that deeply." Denzel gave a slight nod. "Good, because I believe in truth too, so much so that my team and I have been digging. Not the surface-level stuff, but the records you thought were forgotten. And what we found, well," the faint smile slipped from Bondi's face. Senator Lindsey Graham shifted uneasily in his chair. Reporters in the gallery perked up, fingers poised above their keyboards. "I want to ask you about 2013, Denzel continued, reaching into his portfolio. "Something involving a case out of Tampa, a young woman named Maria Santos, and a decision you made that changed the course of several lives." Bondi froze. The color drained from her face. Her lawyer leaned forward to whisper, but Bondi brushed him off, her mind racing. Maria Santos, 2013, Tampa. How could they possibly know? The records were sealed. The witnesses. "I'm not sure what you're referring to, Congressman," Bondi stammered, her voice missing its earlier edge. Denzel's lips curved into a half-smile, the kind of smile that didn't offer comfort but warning. The smile of a man who'd just caught someone in a lie. "Really, Miss Bondi, you don't remember Maria Santos? You don't remember the case your office buried, the documents destroyed, the witnesses who were pressured into silence?" The room erupted. Reporters hammered on their phones, the gallery gasped, and committee members leaned forward, locked in. "Congressman, I don't know what you think you've found," Bondi started, her voice cracking, "but I can assure you." "What I found," Denzel cut in, his voice rising, holding up the folder, "is proof that you orchestrated a cover-up, proof that you obstructed justice, proof that you betrayed your oath of office and the public trust." Denzel rose from his seat, the manila folder in his hand, and strode deliberately toward the witness table. The room hushed as the tension thickened. Security shifted in their stance, unsure whether to intervene. Chairman Durbin lifted a hand, giving Denzel the floor. "Miss Bondi," Denzel said, now standing just feet away, voice resonant, commanding, "I'm going to give you one chance to tell the truth about Maria Santos, because what I hold in this folder will erase any credibility you think you have left." Bondi's lawyer jumped up. "Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous. The congressman is trying to intimidate the witness with theatrics and unsubstantiated—" "Sit down, counselor," Durbin snapped, his gavel silencing the protest. "The congressman has the floor." Denzel opened the folder and slid out a document with deliberate care. "This," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber, "is a sworn affidavit from Detective Raymond Torres of the Tampa Police Department. Retired now, but in 2013, he was on the front lines of this very case. He was the lead investigator on the Santos case," Denzel said, his voice steady, His eyes locked on Bondi. He held up the affidavit like it was a weapon. Would you like me to read what Detective Torres says about your involvement? Bondi's hands trembled uncontrollably. She reached for her water glass, but in her panic tipped it over. Water spilled across the polished table. An aide rushed forward with towels, but Bondi didn't notice. Her eyes were glued to the paper in Denzel's hand, as if it were a blade aimed straight at her. Detective Torres states, Denzel began, his voice carrying across the room, that on June 15, 2013, he was summoned to a private meeting with then Attorney General Pam Bondi. At that meeting, he was ordered to shut the Santos case down immediately. When he protested, when he pointed out that his team had strong evidence of human trafficking tied to prominent Florida businessmen, Miss Bondi told him, and I quote, "Some cases aren't meant to be solved. Some people are too important to prosecute. You need to understand that, or you'll find yourself without a badge." The hearing chamber detonated. Reporters bolted for the exits, already dialing editors. Senator Graham leapt to his feet, shouting about smear tactics and ambushes. Democrats yelled for calm. The gallery dissolved into chaos. "That's a lie," Bondi finally shouted, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "Torres was a disgruntled employee. He was fired for misconduct. His word means nothing." But Denzel's expression didn't flicker. He gave a slight, knowing smile. "I thought you might say that, which is why I also have this." He drew out another document and held it up. "This is a copy of an email you sent from your official account to your staff, verified by 3 independent forensic experts. Would you like me to read it?" Bondi's lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically in her ear. But she wasn't listening. She knew. She remembered that email. She remembered typing it. She remembered believing it would never surface, because she had ordered every copy destroyed. Yet here it was, alive in Denzel's hand. "The email," Denzel continued, his voice cutting through the silence, "is dated June 16, 2013, one day after your meeting with Detective Torres. It reads, 'Team, the Santos matter is closed as of today. All files are to be transferred to my office immediately. No copies are to be retained. No further investigation is authorized. Anyone who continues will face termination and possible prosecution for insubordination. I've been assured by our friends in Tampa that this is for the best. Sometimes we must make difficult decisions for the greater good. This is one of those times.'" Denzel lowered the paper, his eyes piercing Bondi like spotlights. "Miss Bondi, tell us, who were these friends in Tampa? What greater good did you think you were serving by killing an investigation into human trafficking?" Bondi's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her face flushed crimson, beads of sweat running down her temple despite the cold air in the chamber. "I also have bank records," Denzel pressed on, reaching back into the folder. "Records showing that just 2 weeks after you shut down Santos, your campaign received $500,000 from a PAC called Florida First. Would you like to guess who the major donors were?" "This is a witch hunt," Bondi cried, her voice ragged. "You're twisting facts, taking things out of context." "Am I?" Denzel asked, his voice quiet but lethal. He reached into the folder again and pulled out a glossy photograph. "Then perhaps you can explain this. A fundraiser in Miami, July 4th, 2013. That's you, smiling, shaking hands with the Carlos Mendoza, the same man Torres was investigating. The same Carlos Mendoza later convicted in federal court of money laundering and conspiracy. Not of trafficking, because you made sure that part of the case never saw daylight." The gallery erupted again. Flashbulbs popped, gasps filled the air. Chairman Durbin's gavel cracked repeatedly against the wood. "Order! We will have order in this hearing room." Gradually the noise settled, though the tension only thickened. Denzel didn't sit down. He remained standing, folder in hand, his presence dominating the chamber. "Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I have one more piece of evidence." Durbin nodded slowly. "Proceed." An aide wheeled a laptop to the center table, connecting it to the hearing room's massive display screens. The lights dimmed slightly as the monitors flickered on. And then her face appeared, a woman in her early 30s with dark hair framing tired eyes. She looked straight into the camera, her voice quiet but trembling with weight. "My name is Maria Santos," she said. "In 2013, I was 19 years old. I was brought to Florida from Guatemala with promises of work as a nanny. Instead, I was forced into terrible things. ChatGPT said, "I managed to escape," Maria Santos said on the screen, her voice trembling. "I went to the police. Detective Torres believed me. He promised he would stop the men doing this to other girls. But then, suddenly everything stopped. He told me the case was closed, that there was nothing he could do. He looked scared. He told me to leave Florida, to disappear. He said powerful people wanted me gone." She paused, wiping away tears. Later, I learned it was the Attorney General herself, Pam Bondi, who shut the case down. I learned she took money from the very men who hurt me. I've been hiding for 10 years, terrified to speak. But when Congressman Washington's office contacted me, when they promised to protect me, I knew I had to tell the truth. Pam Bondi didn't just fail to fight for us, she protected our abusers. She took their money. She is not a champion of law and order. She's a criminal who used her power to shield other criminals. The video ended. The room was silent. Every eye turned toward Pam Bondi, who sat frozen at the witness table, her mask of confidence shattered. Senator Graham shot up, his voice cracking with urgency. "Mr. Chairman, this is outrageous. This witness hasn't been vetted. This video could be fake. None of this evidence has been authenticated." "Actually, Senator," Denzel interjected smoothly, "everything has been authenticated. I have forensic experts ready to testify. I have the original documents, not copies. I have a verified chain of custody, and Maria Santos is prepared to appear in person under oath if necessary." He turned back to Bondi, his tone calm but unrelenting. "So, Miss Bondi, I ask you again, do you want to tell the truth about what happened, or should I continue?" Bondi's lawyer shot to his feet. "Mr. Chairman, my client requests a recess to consult with counsel." "No," Bondi suddenly barked, her voice raw. "No, I don't need a break." She pushed herself to her feet, swaying slightly, her once perfect composure gone. Her hair was wild from nervous hands running through it, her makeup streaked from sweat and smudges. "This is a hit job," she shouted, her voice echoing off the chamber walls. "A coordinated attack by the radical left to destroy anyone who supports President Trump. These are lies, distortions, propaganda." "Then you deny it?" Denzel asked evenly. "You deny shutting down the Santos investigation? You deny taking money from the suspects? You deny the email, the meeting with Detective Torres, all of it?" I, Bondi stammered. "Because I have more," Denzel said, his tone like a hammer. He lifted the folder again. "Phone records, text messages, even recordings of your conversations with Carlos Mendoza. Would you like me to play those?" That was when Pam Bondi broke. "You don't understand," she roared, slamming her hand against the table. "You don't understand how things really work. Yes, I shut down the investigation. Yes, I took the money. You sit there in judgment, so righteous, so pure, but you have no idea the pressure I was under, the threats I faced." The hearing room gasped as one. Bondi's lawyer lunged for her arm, hissing for her to sit down, but she shook him off violently. "Those men Torres was investigating?" she screamed, her voice rising higher. "They owned half of Florida. They had judges, police chiefs, politicians in their pockets. If I had pushed that case, people would have died. Torres would have died. I would have died. So you chose to protect yourself instead of the victims of human trafficking?" Denzel asked quietly, his voice cutting sharper than a shout. "I chose to survive," Bondi fired back. "Yes, I took their money because that's how the game is played. That's how you stay in power long enough to do some good. You compromise, you deal, you do what you have to do." "You betrayed your oath of office," Denzel said, his voice low but burning. "You betrayed the people of Florida. You betrayed Maria Santos. You betrayed every victim who counted on you for justice." "Don't you dare lecture me about betrayal," Bondi shrieked, her voice cracking. "You think you're pure? You think none of you have made deals? None of you have dirty hands? This is Washington. This is politics. Everyone has dirt. Everywhere." Chairman Durbin was slamming his gavel again and again. "Order, Miss Bondi, compose yourself." But she was beyond composure, beyond control. Her voice grew wild, desperate. "You want to destroy me, Fine, but I won't go down alone. I know things. I know about deals, about money, about cases buried for senators in this very room, for judges, for cabinet members. This goes all the way to the top. Miss Bondi, her lawyer shouted, finally seizing her arm, pulling her back into her chair. Stop talking. You're incriminating yourself, Bondi's lawyer hissed. But it was far too late. Every word she had screamed, every desperate confession, had already been captured by the cameras, by the stenographer, and by millions of Americans glued to their screens. Denzel Washington stood calmly in the center of the storm. He had expected Bondi to crack, but not to collapse so spectacularly. He waited, letting the chaos burn itself out, before stepping back to the microphone. His voice, low but commanding, cut through the din like a knife. Mr. Chairman, Denzel said, I request permission to enter these documents into the official record. Chairman Durbin, still reeling from Bondi's meltdown, nodded numbly. Without objection, so ordered. I object, Lindsey Graham roared, his face red with fury. This is a kangaroo court. None of these documents have been vetted. Senator Graham, Denzel replied coolly, would you like to see the authentication certificates? I have them here. 3 independent forensic document examiners, one of whom works with the FBI. Would you like to challenge their credentials? Graham's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He slumped back in his chair, seething. Denzel turned back to the stack of evidence, his voice steady. Let me show the committee what we're really dealing with. This isn't an isolated case. This is a pattern. He lifted a bank statement high for the cameras. June 2013, $100,000 deposited into Sunshine Legal Consulting, a shell company run by Bondi's chief of staff. The source? Another shell company tied to Carlos Mendoza. He pulled out another. July 2013, another $100,000. August, $150,000. September, $200,000, month after month. By the end, nearly $2 million funneled from the very men under investigation directly into Bondi's orbit. The cameras zoomed in on Bondi. She had collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Her lawyer frantically tapped at his phone, no doubt trying to broker some kind of lifeline. And that's not all, Denzel continued, his voice rising. Here's a list of other cases mysteriously closed or delayed under Bondi's watch. Drug trafficking, money laundering, public corruption, and in every case, we found financial connections between the suspects and her campaign. He held up a chart, lines, arrows, names, a sprawling web of corruption. This wasn't one mistake. This wasn't one lapse in judgment. This was systematic, institutional. Corruption woven into the very fabric of Florida's top law office. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. And furthermore, Denzel pressed on, I have sworn statements from 6 former members of the Florida Attorney General's office. 6. They all described the same thing. Wealthy, connected individuals shielded from justice, while staff who questioned orders were silenced, demoted, or fired. He read from one. We all knew what was happening, but we were afraid. Pam Bondi was untouchable. Anyone who resisted her decisions paid the price. Another. The Santos case was the worst, but it was part of a pattern. If you had money and connections, Bondi's office would make your problems disappear. The room buzzed with outrage, disbelief, fury. Camera operators scrambled, unsure whether to focus on Denzel's relentless delivery, Bondi's unraveling composure, or the senator's horrified faces. Then Denzel turned his gaze back to Bondi. His voice dropped, quiet but sharp. You said earlier this goes all the way to the top. Would you care to elaborate? Who else was involved in these cover-ups? Bondi's head snapped up, her eyes wild, unhinged. You want names? She shouted. I'll give you names, Senator. Her lawyer lunged forward, clamping a hand over her mouth. My client will not be answering any more questions without immunity. Denzel let out a humorless laugh. Immunity? Your client just confessed to bribery and obstruction of justice on national television. Immunity is off the table. But he wasn't finished. He had saved the sharpest blade for last. He reached into the folder one final time and held up a sealed transcript. There's one more thing, Denzel said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. Perhaps the most damning piece of evidence yet, a recording transcript, Miss Bondi, of a conversation you had with Carlos Mendoza on July 10th, 2013. Bondi's face drained of all color. Her eyes went wide with terror. "That's impossible," she whispered. "There were no recordings." "We were careful," Bondi stammered. "You were careful," Denzel said evenly, lifting the transcript. "But Carlos Mendoza, he was more careful. He recorded everything, probably as insurance. And when federal authorities arrested him in 2018, he cut a deal. Part of that deal was handing over these recordings." The room went still as Denzel began to read. "Mendoza, the situation is handled. Bondi completely. Torres has been neutralized. The girl is gone. The investigation is dead. Bondi, and there won't be any problems? Mendoza, not as long as our arrangement continues. Bondi, you keep your end, I'll keep mine. Mendoza, the next payment will be ready next week. Bondi, make sure it goes through the usual channels. And Carlos, this conversation never happened. Mendoza, of course, Pam, it never happened." Denzel lowered the page, his eyes locked on Bondi. "Except it did happen, and now the entire country knows it." The hearing chamber erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted questions. Senators bickered. Security guards moved toward the exits as if expecting Bondi to bolt. And then, she did something no one expected. Pam Bondi shot to her feet, her chair crashing backward, her face twisted into a mask of rage and humiliation. She pointed a shaking finger at Denzel. "You think you've won?" she screamed. "You think you've accomplished something? You've just opened a door that should have stayed shut. The people I protected, the deals I made, they weren't just for me, they were for this entire system. And now you've destroyed everything." She spun toward the committee, eyes wild. "You're all hypocrites. Half of you took money from the same people I did. Half of you buried cases just like I did. But now you sit there and judge me because it's politically convenient." Her hand shot out, pointing at Senator Graham. "You knew, Lindsay. You knew exactly what I was doing. You told me I was making the tough choices. And now you leave me out here alone?" Graham's face drained of color as he sank into his seat. Bondi whipped toward the Democrats. "And you, so righteous, so pure. Where were you when these trafficking rings were operating? Where were your investigations? Your hearings? You didn't care then. You only care now because it's a chance to take down a Trump ally." She furiously stuffed papers into her briefcase, snapping it shut with a violent slam. "I'm done with this charade. You want to crucify me? Fine. But remember this day. Remember that you destroyed someone who was just trying to survive an impossible system. And remember this, my secrets won't stay buried forever." She stormed toward the exit. Her lawyer trailed behind, shouting her name, but she didn't slow. Security guards glanced toward Chairman Durbin for instructions. He raised a weary hand. "Let her go," he said softly. "She's not going anywhere." At the door, Bondi turned one last time, her eyes finding Denzel. Her voice dropped low, cold, and venomous. "This isn't over. You've made an enemy today, Congressman Washington. And I have a long memory." Denzel didn't flinch. His reply was calm, steady, devastating. "So do the victims of human trafficking, Ms. Bondi. So does Maria Santos." Bondi's face contorted with rage. For a split second, it looked as if she might charge back into the room. But then she spun and stormed out, slamming the heavy wooden door so hard it echoed like a gunshot through the chamber. The instant the door closed, the hearing dissolved into pandemonium. Reporters scrambled over each other to race outside. Senators shouted to be heard over the din. C-SPAN's cameras captured every second of the historic collapse. Chairman Durbin hammered his gavel in vain before finally sighing, "This hearing is in recess," and abandoning the podium. Through it all, Denzel Washington remained composed at his seat, carefully sliding the damning documents back into his folder. His aides swarmed him with congratulations, but he stayed calm, professional, already thinking ahead. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. Within minutes, social media detonated. Bondi meltdown was trending worldwide. Clips of her shouting confession and storming out were shared millions of times. News networks scrambled to go live. CNN flashed breaking news. Pam Bondi admits corruption in explosive congressional hearing. Fox News, caught flat-footed, went with chaos in Congress as Bondi hearing spirals out of control. MSNBC was blunt. Bondi confesses to bribery, obstruction of justice. Legal experts flooded the airwaves, dissecting the fallout, weighing the consequences, and speculating what would happen next. ChatGPT said, former prosecutors were already on air debating potential criminal charges. Political analysts were in full spin mode, dissecting what this meant for the GOP and Trump's inner circle. But inside the hearing room, Denzel Washington wasn't celebrating. He was planning. He walked calmly to Chairman Durbin, who was gathering his papers. "Mr. Chairman," Denzel said in a low, steady voice, "we need to refer this matter to the Department of Justice immediately. We need protection for Maria Santos and every other witness. And we need subpoenas. Every record from the Florida Attorney General's office during Bondi's tenure." Durbin looked at him gravely, then nodded. "Agreed on all counts. My staff will coordinate with yours. And Congressman, exceptional work today. You may have just exposed one of the biggest corruption scandals in recent American history." "This is just the beginning," Denzel replied. "Bondi was right about one thing. It does go deeper. We follow every lead, every name she dropped, every connection." As they spoke, Senator Graham scurried past, head down, avoiding eye contact. Other senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Bondi's wild accusations hadn't been dismissed. They had landed, striking nerves in every corner of the chamber. Within 2 hours of Bondi's explosive exit, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia announced the launch of a full investigation. The FBI confirmed they were assembling a task force. The Florida Attorney General's office quickly issued a statement pledging cooperation and announcing their own internal review of Bondi-era cases. Meanwhile, Bondi's lawyer scrambled to contain the fire. He released a statement claiming, "Mrs. Bondi's words were made under extreme duress and should not be considered admissions of guilt. She was ambushed in a coordinated political attack designed to destroy her reputation. We will explore all legal options, including defamation suits against Congressman Washington and his staff." But the damage was irreversible. Legal heavyweights across the spectrum weighed in. Alan Dershowitz told Fox News, "Look, I've defended a lot of people, but when you admit on camera that you took money and shut down investigations, that's a confession. No lawyer can walk that back." On CNN, former federal prosecutor Preet Bharara was more blunt. "Pam Bondi just committed legal suicide on national television. The question isn't if she'll be prosecuted, it's how many charges she'll face and who else she'll drag down with her." That same night, Maria Santos sat down for her first public interview. 60 minutes, hastily arranged, Anderson Cooper across from her. Her story was devastating. "For 10 years I've lived in fear," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Fear the men who hurt me would find me. Fear that no one would believe me. Fear that Pam Bondi's power would silence me forever. But today, Congressman Washington gave me justice. Not full justice. Maybe that will never come. But at least the truth is out." Cooper leaned in. "What do you want to happen now?" "I want everyone held accountable," Maria answered firmly. "Not just Bondi. Everyone who knew and stayed silent. Everyone who took money. Everyone who looked away while girls like me suffered." The interview drew over 20 million viewers, one of the most watched segments in 60 Minutes history. In Washington, the fallout was seismic. Senators whom Bondi had pointed at during her meltdown were already scrambling, issuing denials. But the media wasn't letting go. That evening, the Washington Post dropped a bombshell. At least 3 sitting senators had received campaign contributions from the same donor network tied to the Santos case. The walls of Washington were closing in. Federal Election Commission records lit up the airwaves. Patterns of suspicious donations, identical to those funneled to Pam Bondi, were now tied to sitting senators. And at the center of the storm stood Lindsey Graham. Clearly rattled, Graham held a rushed press conference. "I categorically deny any knowledge or involvement in corruption," he said, his voice shaky. "Yes, I knew Pam Bondi. Yes, I supported her career. But I had no knowledge of illegal activities. If I had known, I would have reported it immediately. But reporters weren't letting him off easy. Senator, Bondi said you told her she was doing the right thing. What did you mean by that? Graham stammered, fumbling for words. I don't recall any such conversation. Miss Bondi was clearly under distress, saying things that weren't true. The grilling intensified until his aides physically pulled him from the podium. But Graham wasn't the only one sweating. The fallout reached Donald Trump himself. Pam Bondi had been one of Trump's fiercest defenders. On his impeachment team, on his rally stages, whispered for positions in his administration. So when the scandal detonated, Trump scrambled to cut her loose. On Truth Social, he wrote, Pam Bondi was a minor figure, someone I barely knew. Maybe she showed up at an event or two. I had no knowledge of her actions as AG in Florida. Another witch hunt trying to smear me. But the internet had receipts, videos, and tweets resurfaced of Trump praising Bondi as fantastic and one of the great AGs in America. Photos showed them laughing together at Mar-a-Lago dinners, arm in arm at private events. Even worse, the same donor network funding Bondi had poured millions into Trump's campaigns. Circumstantial, maybe, but the optics? Catastrophic. Republican strategists went into meltdown. One, speaking anonymously to Politico, admitted, "This is a disaster. Bondi was supposed to be one of our clean ones. If she's this compromised, what does it say about everyone else around Trump?" While the GOP scrambled, Denzel Washington was being lionized. His methodical takedown of Bondi was hailed as one of the most devastating congressional interrogations in modern history. That evening, he joined Rachel Maddow live. "This wasn't about politics," Denzel said firmly. "This was about justice. Maria Santos and countless other victims deserve their truth told, their suffering acknowledged, their abusers held accountable." Today was just the first step. "How did you get the evidence?" Maddow pressed. "Good old-fashioned work," Denzel replied. "My staff chased paper trails. We tracked money. We spoke to witnesses who'd been terrified into silence. We used forensic accounting, and we had help from whistleblowers inside the system who couldn't stand by anymore." "And what's next?" Maddow asked. Denzel didn't hesitate. "Bondi herself admitted this goes all the way to the top. We will find out what that means. We'll investigate every name, every connection. The American people deserve the truth, no matter how deep this runs." Social media exploded with praise. #Washington for President trended worldwide. Denzel laughed it off when asked, saying, "I'm focused on my job in Congress. There's too much work ahead to think about anything else." But then came the deluge. Within 48 hours, the 6 witnesses Denzel had alluded to went public. Their testimonies were damning. Jennifer Walsh, a former prosecutor, told CBS, "We had a saying in the office. If they can pay, they can play." It was a joke, but it was also true. Wealthy defendants? Their cases disappeared. Poor ones? They got crushed. It was 2 different justice systems. Michael Chen, a former investigator, went further. "I personally saw Bondi having dinner with people under active investigation. When we objected, we were told, 'Mind your business,' or 'find a new job.' But the knockout punch came from David Morrison. Bondi's former chief of staff. Immunity secured, he broke ranks, and what he revealed was worse than anyone imagined. "I set up the shell companies," David Morrison admitted in a leaked deposition. His voice on the tape was steady, almost cold. "I managed the flow of money. I kept records that were supposed to be destroyed, but weren't. I know where all the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking, and I'm prepared to tell everything." By Thursday, just 2 days after Denzel Washington's devastating hearing, the first criminal charges landed. Not yet against Pam Bondi. Prosecutors were still assembling that case. But Carlos Mendoza, already serving time in federal prison, was hit with new counts of bribery of public officials. More explosive still, 2 Florida state senators and a former judge were arrested on corruption charges tied directly to the scandal. The investigation was snowballing. The Department of Justice announced a special task force to examine corruption in attorneys' general offices nationwide. "The Bondi case may be just the tip of the iceberg," Attorney General Merrick Garland declared at a press conference. "We will follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of political affiliation or position. By Friday, Pam Bondi tried to fight back. She appeared on a friendly podcast, her face haggard, her tone defensive. "I was ambushed," she insisted. Congressman Washington had this planned all along. The documents were taken out of context. The Maria Santos video was edited. This is part of a conspiracy to destroy conservatives who support President Trump. But when the host pressed her directly, "Did you take money from Carlos Mendoza?" Bondi faltered. "The situation was complicated," she muttered. "There were legitimate campaign contributions, completely legal." "But you admitted in the hearing that you took bribes," the host cut in. "I was under extreme stress," Bondi snapped. "I wasn't thinking clearly. My words were twisted." Even her sympathetic base wasn't buying it. The podcast comment section tore her apart, with many demanding she stop lying and take responsibility. Meanwhile, the scandal only widened. The New York Times dropped a bombshell investigation showing that the Bondi model wasn't isolated. It was systemic. In at least 12 states, wealthy defendants made large contributions to elected law enforcement officials, and soon after their cases mysteriously evaporated. The Miami Herald revealed even darker truths. The trafficking network Bondi had shielded was far larger than anyone realized. According to federal investigators, it had operated across multiple states for over a decade, victimizing hundreds of women. If Bondi hadn't buried the Santos investigation in 2013, hundreds of lives could have been spared years of horror. The public outrage was volcanic. Protests erupted outside the Florida Attorney General's office. Victims' rights groups demanded reform of how state AGs were funded, elected, and overseen. Through it all, Denzel Washington stayed steady. No gloating, no grandstanding. Instead, he used his new platform to push for systemic reform. On Meet the Press that Sunday, Chuck Todd asked him what came next. "This isn't about one person or one party," Denzel said firmly. "This is about systemic corruption poisoning our justice system. We need oversight. We need reform. And we need to make sure no one, no matter how rich, no matter how connected, is above the law." Todd pressed him on Bondi's claims that she was targeted for political reasons. "The evidence speaks for itself," Denzel replied coolly. "I didn't make Pam Bondi take bribes. I didn't make her shut down investigations. I didn't make her protect traffickers. I simply exposed what she did. If fighting for justice is political, then I'm fine with that." He then announced bold new legislation, independent oversight boards for state attorneys general, mandatory disclosure of campaign donations over $1,000, and legal protections for whistleblowers inside law enforcement. "We can't just expose corruption," Denzel said. "We have to stop it before it happens again." By week's end, the fallout was relentless. 3 U.S. senators returned campaign donations tied to the scandal. A federal judge in Florida recused himself from all cases after his name surfaced in Morrison's files. 2 powerhouse law firms announced internal probes after senior partners were implicated. The ripple effects weren't slowing. They were just beginning. Pam Bondi had vanished from public view. Her lawyer surfaced briefly to announce that she was cooperating with authorities, which every seasoned legal analyst read the same way. She was scrambling for a plea deal. Rumors swirled that she was ready to name names, big names in exchange for leniency. The Republican Party lurched into full-blown damage control. The RNC issued a carefully worded statement condemning corruption in all its forms and putting distance between themselves and Bondi. But the stain was already spreading. Bondi had been too close to Trump's inner circle for too long, too visible at his side, too trusted as one of his fighters. Democrats, while relieved to see corruption dragged into the sunlight, were far from comfortable. Bondi's furious rants during the hearing about bipartisan rot hung in the air like smoke. Who else would fall? How deep did this really go? Then came the most powerful moment of the week. Maria Santos walked back into Congress. Not hidden on a screen this time, not reduced to testimony piped in through the video. She sat at the same witness table where Bondi had once perched, defiant and smiling. "For 10 years, Maria began, her voice firm and clear, "I thought justice would never come. For 10 years, I lived knowing the people who hurt me walked free, because someone in power decided their freedom was worth more than my suffering." She paused, her eyes glistening but steady. But this week, that changed. This week, the truth came out. This week, I saw the woman who protected my abusers exposed for what she really is. Then she turned, locking eyes with Denzel Washington, seated on the committee dais. Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for believing in the truth. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for giving me, and so many others, a voice. The hearing room erupted into thunderous applause. Even the Republicans rose to their feet, clapping for Maria Santos. For one brief, extraordinary moment, there was no party line, no divide, only recognition of courage. Political analysts scrambled to capture what had just happened. They called it the Bondi scandal. Some dubbed it Corruption Thursday. Its aftershocks were immediate and seismic. First, Pam Bondi's political career was obliterated. A woman once whispered about as a future U.S. Attorney General was now staring down years in federal prison. Second, Denzel Washington had stamped himself as a rising political force. His laser-sharp preparation and calm, devastating style were already being dissected in law schools as a masterclass in congressional interrogation. Invitations poured in. Commentators began openly speculating about his future on the national stage. Third, the scandal sparked a nationwide reckoning. People were asking, loudly, how many other cases had been buried? How many victims silenced? How many prosecutors and judges had been bought? Fourth, the crisis was shredding Republican confidence, especially in Trump's circle. If someone as prominent as Pam Bondi could be this corrupt, who else had been playing the same game? Then, on Monday, 1 week after the hearing, Bondi's lawyer read her final public statement. After much reflection and consultation with my family and legal counsel, I have decided to cooperate fully with all investigations. I take responsibility for my actions and the harm they caused. I betrayed the public trust and failed in my duty to uphold justice. To Maria Santos and the other victims, I am deeply sorry. Your suffering should have ended when you came forward. Instead, I prolonged it to protect myself and others. That is a burden I will carry forever. To the people of Florida, you deserve better. You elected me to fight for justice, and I failed you. I let power and money corrupt me. I lost sight of why I entered public service in the first place. I will now focus on cooperating with authorities and accepting the consequences of my actions. This will be my final public statement. The statement hit like an earthquake. It was as good as confirmation. Pam Bondi had flipped. She was prepared to name names. The investigation roared forward. FBI agents launched raids in Florida and beyond. Subpoenas flew for financial records. Witnesses were pulled in by the dozen. The Special Task Force announced they had identified more than 100 cases tainted during Bondi's tenure, each one now under review. What Denzel Washington had set in motion at that hearing was no longer just a political scandal. It was a nationwide purge. Some of those cases would be reopened. Justice, long delayed, might finally be delivered. Across the country, powerful figures scrambled for legal cover, hiring criminal defense attorneys in droves. The signs were unmistakable. Indictments were coming. What had started with one folder of documents and one determined congressman willing to read them aloud in the face of power had swelled into one of the largest corruption investigations in American history. In a final interview, Denzel Washington reflected on what had unfolded. I didn't walk into that hearing planning to destroy anyone, he said, his voice steady, reflective. I went in there to seek the truth. But sometimes the truth is so ugly, so shocking, that exposing it looks like destruction. Pam Bondi destroyed herself years ago when she chose corruption over justice. All I did was hold up a mirror. When asked if he carried any regrets, he didn't hesitate. My only regret is that it took this long. How many victims suffered in those 10 years? How many criminals walked free? How many corrupt officials operated with impunity? If anything, this shows why we need more oversight, more accountability, and more people willing to dig for the truth. He paused, then added quietly but firmly, but I also want people to hear this. The system worked. Eventually, it took whistleblowers, journalists, staff who wouldn't give up, and yes, a congressional hearing. But the truth came out. Justice is being served. That should give people hope. No one is above the law, no matter how powerful they think they are. The story of Pam Bondi's downfall and Denzel Washington's triumph was more than just another political scandal. It had become a lesson in democracy itself. First, corruption thrives in darkness, but withers in light. The moment Washington pulled Bondi's actions into the open, her power disintegrated. Second, one determined individual, armed with facts and courage, can take down even the most entrenched figures. Washington didn't have endless resources. He had the truth. Third, victims' voices matter. Maria Santos waited 10 years to be heard, but when her moment finally came, her testimony changed everything. Fourth, institutions, while imperfect, can still deliver justice. Congress had done its job. The justice system was beginning to do its job. The media had amplified the truth. Together, they had exposed corruption at its core. And finally, vigilance is the price of justice. The Bondi scandal grew because too many people looked away, assumed someone else would act, or feared the consequences of speaking up. It ended because Washington and his allies refused to blink. As this chapter closed, it was clear. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The investigation was still unfolding. More arrests loomed. More secrets would surface. Pam Bondi, once a rising star, a name floated for Attorney General, was now a disgraced figure staring down years in federal prison. Her legacy? Corruption, betrayal, and a permanent stain on the justice system. Denzel Washington, by contrast, emerged as a champion of accountability, a defender of the voiceless, and a political force no one could ignore. His interrogation of Bondi was already being hailed as one of the most precise, devastating congressional takedowns ever recorded. But perhaps the truest victory belonged to Maria Santos, and to countless others like her. Their pain could not be erased. But at last, their voices had been heard. At last, justice had begun to move. Some cases might be reopened. Justice delayed might finally be delivered. Across the country, major figures quietly retained criminal defense attorneys, an unmistakable sign they knew indictments were coming. What had begun with one congressman, one folder of documents, was now spiraling into one of the largest corruption investigations in American history. In a final interview for this story, Denzel Washington reflected on everything that had transpired. "I didn't walk into that hearing planning to destroy anyone," he said, his voice steady but resolute. "I went in there to seek the truth. But sometimes the truth is so ugly, so shocking, that exposing it looks like destruction. Pam Bondi destroyed herself years ago when she chose corruption over justice. All I did was hold up a mirror. When asked if he had any regrets about how it played out, Washington shook his head. My only regret is that it took this long. How many victims suffered in those 10 years? Because we don't even know how many criminals walked free. How many other corrupt officials operated with impunity? If anything, this shows we need more oversight, more accountability, more people willing to dig for the truth." He paused for a moment, then added, "But I also want to say this. The system worked. Eventually, it took whistleblowers. It took investigative journalism. It took dedicated staff. And yes, it took a congressional hearing. But the truth came out. Justice is being served. That should give people hope. No one is above the law, no matter how powerful they think they are." The story of Pam Bondi's downfall and Denzel Washington's triumph was more than just another political scandal. It became a reminder of the truths that underpin a democracy. First, that corruption thrives in darkness, but withers in the light. The moment Washington exposed what Bondi had done, her power collapsed. Second, that one determined individual, armed with facts and courage, can take down even the most entrenched figures. Washington didn't have an army or unlimited resources. He had the truth. Third, that victims' voices matter. Maria Santos waited 10 years for justice, but when she finally spoke, her words changed everything. Fourth, that our institutions, imperfect as they are, can still function. Congress did its job. The justice system is doing its job. The media did its job. And when all those pieces come together, even the deepest corruption can be exposed. And finally, that vigilance is the price of justice. The Bondi scandal happened because too many looked the other way, because they assumed someone else would handle it. because they were afraid to speak up. It was exposed because Washington and his staff refused to look away. As this incredible saga of political drama, exposed corruption, and long-denied justice drew to a close, it was clear this was not really an ending. It was a beginning. The investigation pressed forward. More arrests were expected. More secrets were bound to surface. Pam Bondi, once one of the most powerful women in Republican politics, was now a disgraced figure facing the very real prospect of years in federal prison. Her reputation destroyed, her legacy nothing more than corruption and betrayal, her name etched into history as the center of one of the worst scandals in American legal history. Denzel Washington, by contrast, emerged as a champion of justice, a defender of victims, and a political force to be reckoned with. His methodical, relentless takedown of Bondi was already being studied as one of the most devastating congressional interrogations ever conducted. But perhaps the truest victory belonged not to Washington or even to Congress, but to Maria Santos and the countless others who had been denied justice for so long. Their suffering could never be erased. But at last, their voices had been heard. At last, justice had begun, and in the final analysis, the world was left with one undeniable truth. No one is above the law. Justice may come late, but justice always comes.